The purpose of this particular podcast is to acquaint you with sections 1 and 2 of the TWS manual. Section 1 is an analysis. It's where you're looking at your audience of students to determine what they're like and what they need. You also are trying to figure out what kind of resources you have access to. So we're just going to go straight through the manual in these two sections to make sure you understand how to do that. Your first step is to gather as much information as you can. In order to excel in this particular section of the TWS, you need to search for as many variables and categories of information as possible. That means you need to be looking at the broad community, the district, the school, and your classroom. You need to be looking at what technology is available at home, which kids have parents at home in the evening, who works, who has access to the internet at home. Are there classroom computers that you have access to? What are the challenges that you face in the building? How involved are parents? So you want to think beyond basic demographics when you're looking at contextual analysis, but please note basic demographics are wanted as well. So the idea here is that you begin by talking with your cooperating teacher and anybody else in the building that's going to have information about the kids in your classroom, the school, the district, and the broader community. You're going to give out interest surveys, multiple intelligence inventories. You're going to be looking at the KSDE or whatever state you're in, their State Department website, and you're going to be looking for what's called school report cards and district report cards to gather as much data as possible. You also need to note where you got that information because you will have to cite all information gathered from outside sources. Even if you interview the principal to get information or your teacher, all of that needs to be cited as well. Once you review all of this information, basically you're going to share that with your reader, hopefully in the form of graphs and tables as well as narrative. So let's look at the structure of how you'll present this information. This particular section is going to be written in present tense. It's explaining what you're dealing with right now. You're going to start off the section just in paragraph form. It's just a narrative, and you can provide subheadings based on the rubric. Each subheading that's listed in the rubric, you're going to be talking about the community, district, school, classroom in every single section. And what you're going to do is you're going to highlight all of the data that you could find under each of those categories. Let's scroll down to that rubric so you can take a look at that. So here it's about the knowledge of community, school, and classroom factors. And what we want to do is see that you can tell us about the characteristics of the community, the school, and the classroom that affect learning and classroom management. So this could be the size of the classroom, it could be the layout of the classroom, it could be community access to resources. It's not until you get into the knowledge of the characteristics of students and their varied approaches to learning that you're going to start getting into your interest abilities, your interest surveys, and your multiple intelligences. It's not until you get into students' prior skills that you're really going to be getting into their MAP test scores or their DIBEL scores or their state assessments in your content area. In this first section, this is where you're going to present your basic demographics, boy-girl ratios, graduation rates, IEP numbers, ELL numbers. All of that will be included in that section. And in every student teaching seminar, we brainstorm a list of those variables and you take notes on those. So those particular attributes, you will have a nice brainstormed list of a slew of attributes you're going to be looking at, both at the community, district, school, and building levels. At the end, after you've presented all of this data to us in chart form, in table form, and in narrative form, what you're going to see here is at the end you have to say, okay, what are the implications, not just for teaching, but also for managing my classroom or assessing my classroom. So you're going to pick 3 to 5 of those variables, the variables that you've been collecting data on. You're going to pick those and you're going to tell us, these are my top concerns when it comes to planning or classroom management. And you're going to describe for us what the implications of that data are. So for instance, if your students tend to be home in the afternoons by themselves, they're latchkey kids, or their parents work at night, then you probably don't want to have a habit of sending their assignments home to be signed. Or you may not want to give them an interview to do with their parents during the week if their parents week or work during the week. Or if you are going to give an assignment that would require, a parent interview or some exchange or signing of something, maybe you give the kids a longer amount of time to complete that work. So again, you're picking out the 3 to 5 top variables that will most impact how you manage your classroom, how you design instruction and assessment. In each section, as we go through these, and it goes over first an overview of the section, here a suggestion for the structure of what should be done, you'll also see then tips for success. One element that people tend to forget is that they need to select 2 students of interest to focus on, and usually this is a high student and a low student in the class. So after you present all of the data on the district and the community, the school, building itself, the classroom, then you're going to pick out these 2 students that you'll highlight as well to give us more personal, detailed information. That is then when you conclude the TWS Section 1, at the very end is where you talk about those variables that will most impact you. Here you can see where we give you access to, usually people are placed in Kansas or Missouri, so we're giving you their State Department websites. You'll see other references to things, especially if you're struggling with the concept of what should those 3 to 5 factors be, and examples of how you kind of process that in your mind for planning. Be sure to read page 8 and page 9. I wouldn't say that there are any common challenges for this section except maintaining an anonymity within the citations themselves. So if you get the information from a school district, how do you cite that school district's website if their name is in it? And usually what you can do is just basically make a note to your reader that you cannot provide the citation without giving away the school or the district itself. Therefore, in the narrative, you will not cite using the school's information. However, in the bibliography, you do give full source information. That allows the reader to stay away from the bibliography page and focus on the content. So next we're going to move into Section 2. Section 2 is where you focus on your learning objectives. Basically, this is where you're telling us, okay, I know my learner now, and now I need to tell you what kind of curriculum I need to teach. And this is what you're describing for your reader. So as you begin to write your learning objectives, I think one of the things we've discovered is with the implementation of Common Core, there's kind of some confusion as to what all of this means, and the language that's in textbooks is different than what's traditionally used in teacher prep programs. And in addition to that, you start talking about concepts and big ideas. So let's begin here. The first thing you need to do is determine what the big idea of your unit is going to be. What are you really wanting to get at with the students? What you want to do then is to create what's called a concept map, which you've done in sequence 3. And that concept map tells us what is central to your unit. After that concept map central idea is identified, what you do is you determine what are the facts and pieces of information that my students need in order to understand that big idea. And similar to what you did in sequence 3, and you can see the exemplars in Moodle, you are going to create a concept map. And that concept map is what will begin section 2 of the TWS. So when a reader looks at it, they're immediately going to see the big idea in the center and all the pieces of facts or skills that you're going to address within the unit. From there, you're going to tell us, okay, this is what I need to teach. These are the state standards and district standards that relate to that. Now, what I'd like to do is address what that looks like then with school districts that use a little bit different language. I also want to encourage you to be kind of I've heard a colleague use this phrase before, a flexible thinker. And what that means is you kind of have to stop and think, well, if my school district calls it this, what might be another term that I might have heard elsewhere in my education? Because basically in the profession, it gets down to a lot of semantics where people call the same thing several different names. And we want you to start learning how to kind of go with the flow and move from term to term. But with the Common Core being new and with the manual not addressing the Common Core, we're going to go ahead and address it right here within this podcast. So basically, after you state that concept map, you're identifying then the state, national, or local standards you're going to use. You basically are going to do what you see right here. Underneath that map, you're going to give us literally just a list lesson number 1, objective 1. But you need to tell us after, as you see here, after each objective in parentheses, you're going to tell us what the taxonomy level of that objective is. So we want to know where you are in Bloom's. Following the objective and the taxonomy level, you are then going to tell us what are the broader curriculum standards to which your objective is aligned, is attached. So if you can think back to sequence 3, you'll remember that phrases like standard, benchmark, and indicator. A standard is a big idea that you want kids to get. A benchmark takes that big idea and breaks it down by grade level. And then indicators are the little small individual facts and skills that help kids meet the benchmark, which helps them meet the bigger standard. So think of it, if you need to take notes and kind of see this graduated process where the standard is big, then the benchmark is by grade level, and then indicators are small pieces of information. Well, the Common Core State Standards has a lot of philosophical shifts that have caused changes in the way that maybe they refer to curriculum. So if I had to draw a parallel, and I pulled these documents up here so I can share them with you. If I had to draw a parallel then between standards, benchmarks, and indicators, you can see here that in the Common Core Math Standards, this domain up here, it's really just a title. If I had to try to draw some parallel, I would say that this domain is like your standard. Here, the cluster breaks that down a little bit further, and if I had to draw a parallel, again, it's not a great parallel, but if I had to, I would say that this is what would be a benchmark, like a cluster would be a benchmark. And then the standards that they have listed underneath the clusters, that's really what we would call an indicator. And again, you just get into philosophical movements in education that call them different things, but I can tell you for decades it's always been standards, benchmarks, and indicators. And should the Common Core, which is kind of a trend right now, go away, I still think that we'll see that standard, benchmark, indicator always existing. It's just important for you to understand that the domain is the big idea, which goes into a cluster, and underneath clusters are standards. Now, that's true for the math, but of course they're not going to have the same thing for you for literacy. You can see here basically that they have core, what they're calling anchor standards for literacy, and they have 5 here. And then those anchor standards are basically divided down. Let me scroll down here, I can get into this. Are broken down here into individual reading standards. So again, they're calling anchor standards what I would call just broad standards, and then they're going straight into what I would call maybe indicators for that. And again, they're just calling indicators maybe standards, and that's what you see here, the small breakdown. And that's probably why there's been some confusion as to what do I refer this to and how do I show alignment. So here's the bottom line. Whether your school district calls them I can statements, calls them learning targets, I can statements, those are objectives. That's the bottom line. They're the daily goal that you have for your class. It's what those attach to where you start to see variation. So if I use the word objective, that's the same as an I can, it's the same as a learning target. But when we start getting into indicators, benchmarks, and standards, domain, clustered standard, anchor standard, regular standard, it can be really confusing. All you need to do is show us these are the standards I'm using, either Common Core or state, and this is how it translates to my classroom. This is my objective, that how I'm breaking down this broad standard. So after you do that for every single lesson and objective, basically you're going to conclude the section with a narrative. You're going to tell us your rationale. Why did you choose the curriculum you chose? Why did you create the objectives you created? And you basically, it's just going to be a short paragraph that describes that. So section 2 is fairly short, fairly easy to put together once you determine how to align your individual lesson objectives with your curriculum source, if it's a curriculum that's coming from the state, the district, or a textbook. If you come into a situation where the semantics are confusing and you're not quite sure what to call them, these state standards, be sure to check with your professor. Also check pages 11 and 12 to see examples of a concept map, to also get an opportunity to see other tips that might help you. Please also note that you're going to write in future tense because you haven't taught the lesson yet.